Have you ever been judged before anyone even knew your story? Have you ever stood somewhere heart racing, eyes burning, wondering why kindness felt like too much to ask for? Imagine this. A young black girl stands at an airport gate, holding her boarding pass with a smile. She's nervous, excited, ready to fly home to see her father. But in one cruel instant, that hope is ripped away quite literally as a flight attendant tears her ticket in half, accusing her of lying about her seat. The crowd watches in silence. No one moves. No one speaks. Now, pause for a second. If that were you, if someone humiliated you like that, what would you do? Would you scream? Would you cry? Or would you choose something far harder? Grace. Because what that flight attendant didn't know was the girl's father owned the entire airline. But this story isn't about revenge. It's about what happens when pain meets dignity, when one act of cruelty becomes the spark that changes how the world treats each other. So, before we dive in, ask yourself when faced with injustice, what kind of person would you be if this story moves something inside you? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because today, we're not just telling a story, we're taking flight together. The sound of paper ripping sliced through the low hum of the airport terminal. Conversations halted for a moment. A man looked up from his laptop. A child stopped tugging at her mother's sleeve, and a young black girl stood frozen at the gate, her ticket now torn in half, in the hand of a flight attendant. For a second, time seemed to pause. Her name was Leila Carter, 19 years old, standing beneath the bright LED lights of Los Angeles International Airport. The glow reflected off her small suitcase scuffed at the corners, covered with faded college stickers, the kind that told stories of ambition, not privilege. Leila wasn't the type to draw attention. She wore a crisp white blouse, blue jeans, and a simple silver bracelet that caught the light every time she moved. Her hair was braided neatly, pulled back the way her mother used to do when she was little. Her eyes wide, steady, quietly observant, betrayed the storm of confusion growing inside her chest. Moments earlier, everything had been perfectly ordinary. She'd arrived early, printed her boarding pass, and waited her turn like everyone else. But as she stepped to the gate counter, she noticed the attendant's glance linger too long on her from her shoes to her skin. "Good afternoon," Leila had said softly, offering her ticket with a polite smile. The woman behind the counter barely looked up. Her name tag read Nancy Shaw. Her voice carried that clipped tone of someone too tired or too proud to hide her judgment. "Destination?" she asked flatly. "New York," Leila replied. "Flight 247 first class." That last part, first class, made Nancy's eyebrow twitch. "First class," she repeated, the disbelief thinly veiled. "For you," Leila blinked, unsure if she had heard correctly. "Yes, ma'am. My father booked the ticket through the company account." Nancy exhaled through her nose, a sharp, impatient sound. "Uh-huh. Let me see that." She snatched the boarding pass and the ID from Leila's hand, studying them as though the ink might betray a secret. Her gaze darted back and forth between the photo and the girl in front of her. Behind them, a line was forming. A businessman shifted his weight, checking his watch. A mother bounced a toddler on her hip. The usual rush of air travel continued except for this small, uncomfortable pocket of stillness around the counter. Leila tried to stay calm. Her father's voice echoed faintly in her head. "Dignity doesn't make you weak, sweetheart. It reminds others that you're strong enough not to lose yourself. So she smiled, even when she didn't feel like it. Nancy held the ticket up to the light. "This looks fake," she said finally. "I've seen plenty of people try this trick. It's not fake," Leila answered quickly, her voice still calm but thinner now. "I checked in this morning. Everything went through fine." The attendant sighed loudly. "Sure you did." She leaned closer, lowering her voice but not her condescension. "Listen, sweetheart, we can't let people sneak into first class just because they think they belong there." The words stung more than Leila expected. "People like you." She had heard that tone before in stores, at restaurants, in classrooms. It was never about her clothes or her luggage. It was always about her. Her fingers tightened around the handle of her suitcase. "Please," she said, "if you just scan it again, you'll see it's valid." Nancy's lips curled. No need to waste more time. And with one deliberate motion, she tore the boarding pass clean in half. The sound echoed. Leila's breath caught. "What are you doing? That's my ticket." Nancy tossed the halves into the trash can beside her desk. "Move along. You can buy another one at the main desk if you have the money." For a moment, no one spoke. The man with the laptop lowered his eyes. The mother turned away. Even the intercom seemed to go silent. Leila stood still, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it. Heat rose to her cheeks not from shame, but from a quiet, shaking anger. She wanted to say something, anything, but her throat closed up. Nancy turned to the next passenger as if nothing had happened. Next, Leila swallowed hard, forcing back the tears pressing at the corners of her eyes. She bent down, picked the torn pieces from the trash, and held them in her hand like a small broken promise. "Don't cry here. Don't give her that victory," she told herself. She took a step back from the counter, her mind spinning. She could call security. She could raise her voice. But she remembered what her father had always said. You don't have to shout to be heard. You just have to stand tall. So she did. She stood. The people who had watched slowly turned away, embarrassed by their own silence. One man whispered, "That was uncalled for." Another muttered, "Typical LAX drama." Leila took a deep breath. The air smelled like coffee and jet fuel. She turned toward the tall glass windows where planes taxied one after another under the California sun. For a fleeting second, she felt very small, just another face in the crowd, unseen, unheard. But deep down, something inside her quiet but fierce whispered, "This isn't over." As she reached into her bag for her phone, the camera panned to Nancy at the counter, typing away as though she hadn't just humiliated someone. The line of passengers kept moving. The world kept spinning. Leila's phone screen reflected her own eyes back at her steady, now resolute. She opened her contacts and scrolled to one name. Her thumb hesitated for a moment, hovering above it. Then she pressed call. The phone rang only once before a familiar deep voice answered. Leila. Her breath trembled. She tried to sound calm, but her voice cracked. "Dad, she tore up my ticket." There was a pause, a silence so heavy she could almost hear her father's heartbeat through the phone. "Where are you right now?" His tone was calm, measured, but there was steel underneath. "I'm at the gate. They said my ticket was fake. People were staring. I didn't do anything wrong." Another pause, longer this time. Then the sound of a chair sliding across the floor. "Stay exactly where you are," he said. Don't argue. Don't say another word. I'm coming. Dad, you don't have to." But the line went dead. Leila stood there with the phone pressed to her ear, her pulse still pounding. She wasn't sure whether to feel relief or dread. She knew that when Marcus Carter said he was coming, he meant it. Miles away, across the country, the skyline of New York City glowed through the office windows of Ether Sky Airline's headquarters. Inside a glass-walled boardroom, Marcus Carter stood motionless, staring at the city lights that shimmered like scattered diamonds across the Hudson. Around him, a meeting was still in session. Charts flickered on screens. Executives discussed quarterly growth, but their voices faded into background noise as Marcus lowered his phone. He was a tall man in his early 50s, his posture naturally straight, his presence quiet but commanding. His skin was the color of polished mahogany, his hair peppered with gray at the temples. Most people who met him for the first time felt the weight of authority before he ever said a word. But in that moment, he wasn't the CEO of an airline. He was a father who had just heard his daughter's voice shake with humiliation. "Mr. Carter," one of the executives ventured carefully. "Shall we continue with the presentation?" Marcus blinked slowly, refocusing. "No," he said. "We're done here." He closed the folder in front of him, picked up his coat, and headed for the door. A young assistant called after him. "Sir, your next meeting. Cancel it." There was something about the way he said it, soft, steady, final, that made everyone fall silent. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. As the elevator doors closed around him, Marcus's reflection stared back his own face, calm but tight at the jawline. He pressed the button for the ground floor and exhaled slowly. He thought of Leila, her first solo trip, her excitement when she'd called 2 days ago to say she'd been invited to speak at a youth leadership summit in San Francisco. "Dad," she'd said, "they picked my essay about fairness and empathy. Isn't that ironic for an airline kid?" He had laughed. "That's my girl," he'd said. "Remember, humility isn't weakness, it's grace under fire." Now, as the elevator descended, he couldn't stop replaying her words. They said my ticket was fake. By the time he reached the lobby, his mind was made up. He walked past the front desk, his long stride purposeful, every movement efficient. His driver was already waiting outside, engine running. "LAX," Marcus said, climbing into the back seat. The driver hesitated. "That's Los Angeles." "Sir, you want me to book the jet?" Marcus interrupted. "We leave in 20 minutes. The man didn't ask another question. He had worked for Marcus long enough to recognize the tone that meant now, back in the terminal. Leila sat alone near the large window overlooking the tarmac. She watched planes glide down the runway, each one a silver bird cutting through the pale blue afternoon. Her ticket lay in her lap, torn edges fluttering slightly under the air conditioning. She tried to call her father again, but stopped herself. Her hands were trembling, and she didn't want him to hear it. Instead, she opened the photo gallery on her phone. The last picture there was from last week, her and her father at breakfast, laughing over burnt pancakes she'd tried to make, his arm around her shoulder, the kind of easy warmth that always made her feel safe. She whispered to herself, "You always said to keep calm." "I'm trying. Dad." Nancy Shaw, meanwhile, had moved on to other passengers, her expression unreadable. She didn't notice Leila anymore. To her, it was already done, another day, another problem solved. Hours passed slowly. The terminal lights began to dim as evening rolled in. Leila's reflection in the window stared back, tired but alert. Every so often, she'd glance at the gate door, wondering when he would appear. Marcus landed at LAX just after sunset. The sky outside was painted in streaks of crimson and gold. As he stepped out of the private jet, a gust of warm California air brushed his face. He didn't waste time. Within minutes, a black sedan was weaving through the traffic toward the terminal. Inside the car, his phone buzzed with messages, news updates, board memos, calendar reminders, but he ignored them all. Instead, he opened a single photo Leila at age 7, standing on the first ether sky airplane ever built, grinning proudly beside him. He remembered what it took to build that company. The long nights, the rejected pitches, the way people used to look at him when he walked into boardrooms surprised that a black man could be the one leading the meeting. He remembered the years it took to turn that disbelief into respect. And now his daughter had been treated like she didn't belong inside his own company. That thought hit harder than he expected. As the sedan pulled up to the terminal, Marcus's driver turned. "Gate 12, sir." "Yes," Marcus said quietly. "Gate 12." The doors slid open. The hum of the airport rushed in. He spotted her almost instantly. His daughter, small and still, sitting alone with her torn ticket. For a moment, he didn't move. The sight of her sitting there, trying to look brave, broke something inside him. When she saw him, she stood up so fast the chair scraped the floor. "Dad." He crossed the distance in a few strides, and she ran into his arms. The noise of the airport faded around them. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I didn't want to make it a big deal." He pulled back just enough to look at her. "You don't have to apologize, sweetheart. You did nothing wrong." Her eyes welled up, but she smiled weakly. "She said my ticket wasn't real." Marcus's voice stayed low, controlled. "Where is she now?" Leila hesitated, still at the gate. He nodded once. "Good. Stay with me." They began walking together through the crowd. People turned as they passed, not because they recognized him, but because of the quiet authority in his presence. When they reached the counter, Nancy was there, typing something into her screen. She didn't notice him at first. Marcus stopped a few feet away, his tone even almost polite. "Excuse me." She looked up, ready to brush off another customer. "Yes, sir. What can I—" Then she froze. His face was familiar. She'd seen it before, on company posters, in orientation videos, smiling from the cover of business magazines. Her breath caught. "Mr. Carter." He gave a small nod. "That's right. I believe you met my daughter." The air between them tightened. Conversations nearby went quiet. Leila stood beside her father, eyes steady, not angry, just waiting. Nancy's hand trembled slightly on the keyboard. I didn't realize." Marcus leaned in just enough that only she could hear. "That's the point. Ms. Shaw, you didn't realize. You didn't care to." Then he straightened, his voice calm but unmistakably final. "We'll speak with your supervisor." As he turned away, Leila felt her chest loosen, as if the weight she'd been carrying all day had finally lifted. They walked side by side through the terminal, father and daughter, the hum of engines rising in the background. For the first time that day, Leila exhaled. The night outside was deep blue now, the runway lights glowing like stars, and though the storm inside her hadn't fully passed, she felt something settle quietly in its place, dignity. It was only the beginning. The air in the terminal felt heavy, like everyone was holding their breath at once. The whisper spread quietly, first among the staff at the counter, then through the line of waiting passengers. They had just realized who the man standing there was. Marcus Carter, founder and CEO of Sky Airlines, a name printed on the very planes that lined the runway outside. But to Leila, he was just Dad, standing beside her with that same calm strength she'd known all her life. Nancy Shaw's face drained of color. Her eyes flicked from the logo on his briefcase to his face, then to Leila, then back again. For a moment, she couldn't seem to speak. Marcus didn't raise his voice, didn't scold, didn't point. He simply looked at her, steady and composed, his expression impossible to read. "Sir," she finally stammered. I didn't realize," he interrupted gently. "You didn't realize she was human, or you didn't realize who she belonged to." The words weren't loud, but they carried. A few passengers nearby shifted uncomfortably. Someone pulled out a phone. The faint sound of a camera recording broke the silence. Nancy swallowed hard. "Mr. Carter, I assure you, this was a misunderstanding." Marcus tilted his head slightly. "A misunderstanding that involved you tearing up a valid ticket." She tried to answer, but nothing came out. The supervisor, a man in a Navy uniform named Richard Evans, approached quickly, already sensing the gravity of the situation. "Mr. Carter," he said, forcing a smile, "it's an honor to have you here. Sir, I apologize for whatever confusion occurred. Please, let's step into the lounge and we can resolve this privately." Marcus turned slowly toward him. "You want to handle this privately because it looks bad, or because it is bad?" The supervisor's smile faltered. "Sir." Marcus, held up a hand. "My daughter was humiliated in front of your passengers. I think it's fair the resolution happens in front of them, too." Leila stood still, her hands clasped in front of her. She wasn't angry anymore. She was watching her father, watching how he didn't need to shout to be powerful. His calmness was sharper than any rage could ever be. Nancy looked down at her hands, her fingers fidgeting. "Mr. Carter, I just thought you thought she didn't belong in first class," Marcus said, finishing the sentence for her. "You thought she couldn't afford it, or that she'd made a mistake. Maybe you didn't mean harm, but you assumed, and assumptions are how dignity dies in public places." No one moved. The passengers behind the counter shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to look away or keep watching. A few had their phones out now, pretending not to record but capturing every word. The supervisor tried again, his tone pleading. "Sir, please, this will reflect poorly on the company." "Let's not." Marcus's eyes narrowed just slightly. "The company," he repeated. "You mean my company." The words hit like a pin drop in a silent room. Leila felt a strange mix of pride and sadness. She wished it hadn't come to this. She wished the woman had just treated her like anyone else. But deep inside, she also felt the quiet satisfaction of truth coming to light. Marcus finally looked at Nancy again. "I won't fire you here," he said softly. "That's not what this is about. I just need you to understand that the person you dismissed, the one you made feel small, is someone's daughter. Every passenger you see is someone's family, someone's world. You don't need to know their name to treat them with respect." Nancy nodded quickly, tears forming. "I'm sorry, Mr. Carter. I really am." Marcus's expression softened just a little. "Apologies are a start, but change is the goal." He turned to his daughter. "Leila, Come on, we're leaving. Leila followed him through the gate area, the crowd parting quietly to let them pass. As they walked, a woman in line reached out and gently touched Leila's arm. I saw everything, she whispered. Good for you, sweetheart. I hope she learns from it. Leila gave a small, polite smile. She didn't feel victorious, just tired. Outside the terminal, the night air was cool against her face. Marcus stopped for a moment before the car. You okay? She nodded. I think so. He studied her for a moment, then said, What you went through today, it wasn't right, but how you handled it, that was extraordinary. You didn't lose yourself. I'm proud of that. Leila's voice was small. It still hurt, though. He nodded. It should. It means your heart's still working. As the car pulled away from the curb, Leila looked out the window at the airport lights fading behind them. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving behind an ache she couldn't quite name. Marcus sat beside her in silence for a long time. He didn't try to fill the quiet. He knew some pain didn't need fixing right away. It needed to breathe first. Finally, he said, Do you remember when you were little, and you asked why I never got angry when people underestimated me? Leila smiled faintly. You said, Because I'm too busy proving them wrong. He smiled back. Exactly. But today, I realized something. Sometimes proving them wrong isn't enough. Sometimes you have to fix the system that makes them think that way in the first place. Leila looked at him curiously. What do you mean? Marcus leaned back, his eyes thoughtful. Tomorrow, there will be headlines, videos, people talking about what happened. They'll say the CEO of Aether Sky confronted his own employee. Some will praise me, some will criticize me. But what matters isn't the noise. What matters is what we do next. She tilted her head. What are we going to do? He looked out the window. We're going to make sure no one ever feels like you did today. Not in my company. Not on my watch. Leila didn't answer right away. She just reached over and took his hand. It was warm, steady, grounding. When they arrived at the hotel, reporters were already gathering outside, the story spreading faster than Marcus expected. But he didn't stop for them. He wasn't interested in damage control. He was interested in accountability. Inside the quiet suite, he took off his jacket and sat down. Leila perched on the edge of the couch. The city outside their window was alive with lights and motion, but the room was still. Dad, she said softly, you've spent your whole life building this company. What if this ruins it? He looked at her and smiled sadly. Then maybe it needed to be shaken. Sometimes you can't rebuild the house until you see where the cracks are. Leila nodded slowly, absorbing his words. She admired the way he carried his pain, not as anger, but as purpose. She wished she could do that too. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Tomorrow, I'll call an internal review. Every complaint, every incident report, I want them on my desk. We'll find out how deep this problem goes. Leila hesitated. You think there's more? Marcus looked at her with the weary certainty of a man who'd lived long enough to know the truth. There's always more. Silence settled again, the kind that wasn't empty, but full of things unsaid, of decisions forming. Leila finally broke it. Dad? Yes, I'm glad you came. He looked at her, eyes soft. I'd cross the whole country again if it meant you'd never face that alone. She smiled faintly, tears in her eyes. You didn't yell at her. He shook his head. Yelling doesn't change hearts. Understanding does. Outside, a plane lifted into the night sky, its lights blinking against the dark. Leila watched it disappear into the clouds and whispered, almost to herself, "Maybe something good will come from this." Marcus followed her gaze. Something will, but not by accident. We'll make it happen. As she leaned her head against his shoulder, the tension of the day finally slipped away. For the first time since morning, she felt safe. Not because justice had been served yet, but because her father had shown her what real strength looked like. It wasn't power, it wasn't money, it was grace. And in that quiet moment, with the city humming below and the sky above stretching wide and endless, Leila Carter began to understand what her father had been teaching her all along. Morning sunlight spilled through the hotel curtains, brushing softly across Leila's face. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. Then the memory came back in pieces: the airport, the torn ticket, her father's calm fury. Her stomach tightened again at the thought. She sat up slowly, the sound of traffic from the city below faint but constant. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. At first, she thought it was a friend texting to check in, but when she reached for it, dozens of notifications filled the screen: messages, mentions, videos. Her heart sank. "Dad," she called, her voice shaky. From the adjoining suite, Marcus appeared, already dressed in a crisp shirt, coffee mug in hand. "Morning, sweetheart." He saw the look on her face immediately. "What's wrong?" She turned the phone toward him. A video thumbnail glowed at the top of her feed, a still image of the airport gate, with Marcus standing beside Nancy. The caption read, "Flight attendant humiliates passenger, then gets a shock and surprise." Marcus set his coffee down slowly. "Let me see." He watched the clip, silent as the familiar scene unfolded in grainy cell phone footage. The internet had done its work overnight. Millions of views, thousands of comments. "Dad, it's everywhere," Leila whispered. "Everyone's talking about it." He scrolled through the comments. Some people praised him. Finally, a man with power standing up for what's right. Others were less kind. Of course he got special treatment. He owns the airline. Marcus sighed quietly. "I was afraid of this." "What happens now?" she asked. He looked at her with the calm she'd come to recognize as the calm before big decisions. "Now," he said, "we use the attention to make something real." An hour later, his assistant, Chloe, arrived at the hotel with her laptop and a stack of printed news articles. "It's trending on every platform," she said, scrolling rapidly. CNN, the New York Times, even late-night talk shows are mentioning it. People are calling it the torn ticket incident. Leila groaned softly. "That sounds like a movie." Chloe smiled sympathetically. "Well, it's definitely a story." Marcus leaned back, thinking, "Then we'll make sure the story ends right." By noon, they were at the Ether Sky corporate headquarters in downtown Los Angeles. The building's glass facade mirrored the clouds overhead. Inside, everything was sleek, modern, and humming with quiet energy. Employees whispered as Marcus passed, eyes wide. Some smiled in admiration, others avoided his gaze entirely. In the executive boardroom, a dozen senior leaders sat waiting. They looked nervous. Marcus placed his briefcase on the table. "You've all seen the footage," he began. "You know what happened, but this isn't about one employee making a mistake. This is about a culture that let it happen." One executive cleared his throat. "Sir, if I may, public opinion is volatile. We've already issued a statement of apology, but the media wants more details. Should we identify the employee? No. Marcus said immediately, "We're not here to shame one person. We're here to rebuild trust." Leila sat quietly at the far end of the room, watching. It was strange to see her father in his element, composed, confident, every word measured, yet beneath his professionalism, she could still sense his disappointment, not in the company itself, but in what it had allowed. Marcus continued, "I want a full audit of all passenger complaints in the past 5 years. Every incident involving discrimination, bias, or mistreatment, bring them to me personally." The room fell silent. Chloe, typing notes on her laptop, glanced up. "Should I also schedule a press briefing?" "Yes," Marcus said. "This afternoon, I'll speak myself." When the meeting adjourned, Leila followed her father into his office. The large windows overlooked the city, sunlight reflecting off the distant skyline. "You're really going to face the press?" she asked. He nodded. "If I hide, the story becomes theirs. If I speak, it becomes ours." She hesitated. "They're going to ask about me." "I know," he said softly. "I'll protect your privacy, but I won't hide what happened." A few hours later, the press conference began. Reporters filled the lobby of Ether Sky's headquarters, cameras flashing, microphones raised. Marcus stood at the podium, his voice steady and clear. "What happened at LAX yesterday was unacceptable," he said. "Not because it happened to my daughter, but because it could happen to anyone. At Ether Sky, we promise respect and equality for every passenger. Yesterday, we failed." The cameras clicked furiously. A reporter called out, "Mr. Carter, is it true your employee has been suspended?" "Yes," Marcus replied, "and there will be a full investigation. But we're not stopping there. Starting today, we're launching a company-wide initiative to address unconscious bias and discrimination. Every employee from flight attendants to executives will participate, myself included." Another reporter shouted, "What message do you have for people who say your daughter got special treatment because of who you are?" Marcus met her gaze. "They're right. She did. And that's the problem. No one should need a powerful parent to be treated with dignity." The crowd murmured. Some reporters lowered their microphones, visibly moved. Leila, standing off to the side, felt her chest tighten with pride. After the conference, the clip spread even faster than the original video. People quoted Marcus's words, shared them, debated them. Social media was a storm of opinions, some cynical, others inspired, but one phrase began trending: "Dignity has no class." That night, Leila scrolled through her feed again. This time, there was less anger, more reflection, people sharing their own stories of being judged or dismissed. Flight attendants from other airlines posted apologies. A teacher in Ohio wrote, "My students watched this story in class today. We talked about empathy." Leila looked up at her father, who was reading by the window. "I think you started something," she said quietly. He smiled without looking up. "No, you did." The following days were a blur of interviews, meetings, and late-night calls. Marcus stayed composed through it all, but Leila could see the fatigue in his eyes. Change, she realized, was heavy work. One evening, as they walked through the nearly empty Ether Sky Training Center, Marcus stopped beside a large display showing photos of employees from every department. "See them," he said softly. "Every one of them has a story. Some of them grew up poor. Some faced prejudice. Some have never known what it feels like to be treated unfairly. That's why training isn't enough. We have to teach compassion, not compliance. Leila nodded. How do you teach compassion? You show it, he said simply. Later that week, Marcus received a letter from a woman named Nancy Shaw. The handwriting was neat but shaky. Mr. Carter, I've been suspended, and I don't know if I'll ever get my job back, but I want to thank you. Not for mercy, but for clarity. I saw the video, and for the first time, I saw myself the way others see me. I didn't realize how much harm a single action could cause. I'm sorry. Truly. Marcus read it twice, then handed it to Leila. She stared at the words for a long time before speaking. Do you think she means it? He sighed. Maybe. People don't change overnight, but sometimes remorse is the first step. Leila folded the letter carefully. What will you do? Nothing, he said. Forgiveness isn't something I give. It's something she earns by being better. For a while, they stood in silence. The city lights shimmered through the office window, and for the first time since the incident, Leila felt the weight in her chest begin to ease. The torn ticket sat framed on her father's desk, now a reminder of where the change began. Not as a symbol of shame, but as proof that even pain can plant something good if you let it. And as the world kept talking, and the airline began transforming, one truth stayed with Leila above all. What had started as humiliation was becoming hope. 3 weeks later, the world was still talking about the torn ticket. Every news outlet had aired the footage, and late-night hosts had spun it into monologues, but something about this story refused to fade. It wasn't just scandal, it was symbol. People saw their own memories in that moment, the times they'd been dismissed, ignored, or told they didn't belong. Ether Sky's social media team couldn't keep up with the flood of messages from passengers sharing their stories. Leila read some of them at night, sitting cross-legged on her bed, the glow of her laptop soft on her face. I saw myself in you. Thank you for standing up without screaming. Your dad gave me hope for my son. Every word felt like a small hand reaching across the screen. But for each message of support, there was also anger. People who believed Marcus was grandstanding, commenters who asked why he hadn't fixed the problem sooner. The noise was constant, and Leila struggled to tune it out. One evening, she found Marcus in his study, reading a report by the light of a desk lamp. Papers covered the table in neat stacks marked with sticky notes. He looked tired but focused. "Dad," she said softly, "does it ever bother you that some people think you did this for attention?" Marcus didn't look up immediately. When he did, his eyes were gentle. "I used to care what they thought," he said. "But then I realized something attention is only a problem if you don't use it for something good." He turned a page, then added, "People don't change because they're told to. They change because they feel something." Leila leaned against the doorframe. "You think that's what this story did? Made people feel something?" Marcus smiled slightly, enough to start a conversation. That's more than most corporate policies ever do. At headquarters, the conversation was becoming something bigger. Employees from all departments signed up for a new program Marcus called Project Equilibrium, a company-wide initiative focused on inclusion, fairness, and empathy. The program was voluntary at first, but hundreds joined in the first week. There were workshops, open forums, even story-sharing sessions where staff could speak about times they'd been judged or when they had judged others. Leila attended quietly at the back of the room, listening as people cried, laughed, and opened up. She realized how deep the problem went and how ready people were to face it. One afternoon, Marcus invited Leila to join him for a meeting with the company's board of directors. She had never been in a room with so much authority before men and women in tailored suits, their voices low, their eyes sharp. "We all support your effort, Marcus," one board member said, "but you need to understand this could cost us. Training takes time. Rebranding takes money. Not everyone will like the message." Marcus leaned forward. "I didn't build Ether Sky to be liked," he said. "I built it to be respected, and respect starts from the top." The room fell quiet. Leila watched as he spoke with the same calm that had stopped Nancy Shaw in her tracks weeks ago. No anger, just conviction. After the meeting, they walked through the hall together. Leila looked up at him and said, "You make it look so easy." Marcus chuckled. "Nothing worth doing ever is." That night, as Marcus drove home, his phone rang. The caller ID read unknown number. He almost ignored it but answered anyway. "Mr. Carter." The voice on the other end was hesitant, tired. "This is Nancy Shaw." Marcus sat a little straighter. "Yes, Ms. Shaw, I just wanted to thank you," she said. "I've been attending some of those company workshops even though I don't know if I'll get my job back. They're making me see things I didn't want to see before." He was quiet for a moment. "What made you call, I guess? I just needed to say that I was wrong, and that your daughter handled herself better than I did. You raised her well." Marcus took a slow breath. "Thank you for saying that, Ms. Shaw." Before hanging up, Nancy added, "I hope someday I can show that I've learned." When Marcus put the phone down, he didn't feel vindicated. He felt something softer, something close to relief. Maybe people really could change if given the chance. The next morning, he told Leila about the call. She was silent for a moment, then said, "Would you hire her back?" He thought about it. Not yet, but maybe one day. The weeks rolled into months. Project Equilibrium expanded beyond Ether Sky. Other companies reached out, asking to adopt the program. Universities invited Marcus to speak about leadership and social responsibility. Leila often joined him, sharing her experience not as the victim of an incident, but as someone who learned from it. Her voice was steady, her eyes bright. Audiences listened in silence and stood to applaud when she finished. One evening, after a conference in Atlanta, Marcus and Leila sat together at a small restaurant near the hotel. The noise of clinking glasses and soft jazz filled the background. Marcus lifted his glass of water in a mock toast. To the girl who started a movement, Leila laughed. "I just bought a ticket. Dad," he smiled. "Sometimes that's how movements start." Outside, the city lights twinkled like a sea of tiny stars. Leila leaned back and let the moment sink in. For the first time since that day at LAX, the memory didn't hurt. It just felt like a beginning. When they flew home the next morning, something unexpected happened. As they boarded the plane, a young flight attendant paused and smiled at Leila. "Miss Carter," she asked quietly, "I just wanted to say thank you. Because of you, we all had to take those new training sessions. I didn't think I needed them, but I did. They changed how I see people." Leila felt her throat tighten. She smiled back. "That means a lot. Thank you." As she walked down the aisle, Marcus whispered, "You see, small seeds, big roots." Leila nodded. Maybe the real change wasn't in the headlines or the meetings or the hashtags. Maybe it was in moments like this, quiet, human, real. When the plane lifted off, she looked out the window at the clouds below. Her father was reading beside her, but she knew his thoughts were already on the next challenge. She rested her head against the seat and closed her eyes. For the first time, the sound of jet engines felt like home. Later that week, Leila stood in front of a small auditorium at her university, giving a talk titled The Value of Grace. She told her story not as revenge, but as reflection. She spoke about dignity, forgiveness, and how change begins with empathy. When she finished, the room was quiet for a beat before applause rose like a wave. Her professor hugged her and said, "You did something powerful today," that night. Marcus watched a recording of her speech from his office. When she spoke the words "grace under fire," he felt a smile spread across his face. She was everything he had hoped she'd be: strong, kind, fearless in the softest way. On his desk, the framed ticket sat beneath the light, its torn edges now joined by a thin strip of gold tape. He had sealed it, not to hide the tear, but to honor it. A reminder that broken things can still shine if you hold them right. He looked at it for a long time and whispered to himself. This was never about a ticket. Outside the window, a plane passed over the city, its lights fading into the stars. The story that had started with a tear in paper had become a bridge between people, a reminder that compassion, once set in motion, can travel farther than any flight. And so, the torn ticket that had once shamed a girl now stood as proof that even in the cruelest moments, humanity has a chance to begin again. Spring arrived early that year. The skies over Los Angeles were a soft blue, and the air smelled faintly of rain and jet fuel around the Ether Sky training facility. Inside one of the conference halls, rows of chairs were neatly arranged, a podium centered beneath a large company banner that read Project Equilibrium, Building Compassion, Building Tomorrow. Cameras lined the back of the room, journalists ready, while employees filled the seats. Today was the official launch of Ether Sky's nationwide program, and Marcus Carter was about to give the opening address. Leila sat in the front row, her heart steady but full. She watched as her father walked to the stage, calm and composed as always. He wasn't dressed like the CEO today. No expensive suit, no cufflinks, just a simple shirt with rolled-up sleeves. It made him look more like a teacher than an executive. When the room quieted, Marcus took a breath and began to speak. 3 months ago, he said, something happened that forced us to look at ourselves differently. An incident that began with a torn ticket and ended with a call for change. That moment wasn't just about one mistake. It was a reflection of what can happen when empathy takes a back seat. The crowd listened closely. His voice carried the calm weight of truth. "I've spent my life in aviation," he continued. "I've watched people of every color, every background, every story, board the same planes and share the same sky. It reminds me every day that the air doesn't discriminate, and neither should we." A ripple of quiet agreement moved through the room. Marcus paused for a moment, letting the silence settle before adding softly, "This program isn't about saving face. It's about saving faith in each other." The audience applauded, not the kind of applause that comes from politeness, but from resonance. Leila felt her throat tighten with emotion. She thought back to the girl she'd been on that day at LAX, the shock, the humiliation, the quiet anger. She could hardly recognize that version of herself now. After the speech, reporters gathered around Marcus, asking about the progress, the training, the numbers. But what caught Leila's attention wasn't the journalists. It was a woman standing in the far corner of the room, nervous, clutching a small folder, waiting for a pause in the crowd. When their eyes met, Leila froze. It was Nancy Shaw. Her hair was pulled back, her posture unsure. There was no uniform now, just a plain navy blouse and jeans. The sight stirred something unexpected in Leila, not anger, not resentment, but curiosity. Nancy looked smaller than she remembered. When the press conference ended, Nancy took a hesitant step forward. "Miss Carter," she said quietly, "do you have a moment?" Leila nodded slowly. "Of course." They stepped aside near the window overlooking the runway. For a few seconds, neither spoke. The silence was awkward, but not hostile. "I didn't expect to see you here," Leila said softly. Nancy's voice shook. "I wasn't sure I should come, but I needed to. I've been attending the program sessions, listening, learning. It's hard, hearing the things people go through, things I was blind to. I thought I treated everyone fairly. I really believed that. But now I see how often I let my own judgments lead." Leila studied her face. The woman looked genuinely remorseful. Her eyes glistened with the kind of honesty that comes only from reflection. "I lost my job," Nancy went on. "Maybe I deserved to, but I also found something else. Perspective. I started volunteering at a community center near my neighborhood. Most of the kids there are from families that can't afford to travel. I've been teaching them about airports, how flying works, even how to apply for airline jobs one day. It made me realize I've spent so much of my life guarding gates. I forgot what it meant to open doors." Leila felt a lump rise in her throat. She hadn't expected to be moved. That's good," she said quietly. "I'm glad you're doing that." Nancy nodded. "I owe that to you and your father. I came here today because I wanted to apologize again in person this time." She hesitated, then added, "And to say thank you. You could have ruined me. You didn't." Leila looked out the window at a plane lifting into the sky. The engines roared, steady and free. "Maybe we both learned something," she said finally. Nancy smiled faintly. "Maybe we did." A voice called from behind them. "Ms. Shaw." It was Marcus. He had seen them talking and approached quietly, hands in his pockets. Nancy straightened immediately, her nerves returning. "Mr. Carter," she said quickly, "I just wanted to thank you for letting me be part of the program." I didn't expect he stopped her with a small nod. "I saw your volunteer work. The kids love you." Nancy blinked in surprise. You knew," Marcus smiled. "I read every community report. You've done good work. Keep doing it." Her eyes filled with tears. "Thank you, sir. I will." As she turned to leave, Marcus said gently, "Ms. Shaw, redemption isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about proving that you're more than your worst moment." Nancy nodded slowly. "I'll remember that when she was gone." Marcus looked at his daughter. "You handled that well." Leila smiled faintly. "I think I finally understand you. Dad." He chuckled. "That's a dangerous thing to admit." They walked outside together. The afternoon sun was bright, casting long shadows across the tarmac. For a while, they stood watching the planes taxi and rise into the open blue. It was peaceful in a way only airports could be busy, yet somehow still. Later that evening, Marcus hosted a private dinner for the first group of trainees who had completed Project Equilibrium. Leila sat beside him, listening to employees share their experiences. One flight attendant told a story about helping a nervous passenger who reminded her of her younger self. Another spoke about recognizing unconscious bias in her own team and how she was learning to unlearn it. Every story carried weight. When it was over, Marcus raised his glass. "This program isn't about fixing people," he said. "It's about reminding us that we're all still learning. Every day we get to decide whether to see people through fear or through grace." The clink of glasses echoed softly. That night, when Leila returned home, she found herself unable to sleep. She stepped onto the balcony and looked up at the stars scattered across the dark sky. Somewhere, she knew, planes were moving through that same darkness, pilots awake, passengers dreaming, the hum of engines stitching the world together. She thought of Nancy, of her father, of all the people who had reached out after the video. The torn ticket had started something none of them expected. It had cracked something open, letting light through the places people usually tried to hide. For the first time, Leila realized the story wasn't hers anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever been judged, or who had judged and learned to do better. Inside, her phone buzzed with a new message from her father. It was a simple text. "Proud of you. Always." She smiled, her eyes warm. For a man who commanded a global company, he always knew how to say just enough. The next morning, as dawn broke over the city, Leila packed her bag for her return to New York. She looked at the framed copy of her torn ticket on the shelf, traced the golden tape joining its halves, and whispered, "Thank you." Then she closed her suitcase, took a deep breath, and headed for the airport, not as a victim of a story anymore, but as the author of its continuation. When she reached the gate, the attendant smiled and said, "Good morning, Miss Carter. Welcome aboard." And this time, as she handed over her ticket, no one questioned whether she belonged. The auditorium lights dimmed to a warm gold as hundreds of people found their seats. It wasn't a concert, not a movie premiere, yet the energy in the room felt electric. The banners on the stage read "Ether Sky Leadership Summit Beyond the Clouds." Cameras were positioned along the aisles, journalists whispering into microphones, waiting. This was the first time Leila Carter would speak publicly since the incident that had changed her life and, in many ways, the face of her father's company. Backstage, Leila stood still, hands clasped in front of her. She could hear the soft hum of the crowd beyond the curtain, the faint clinking of glasses, the low rumble of conversation. Her heartbeat matched the rhythm of it all, steady, then quick, then steady again. A staff member leaned in. "You're on in 2 minutes. Miss Carter." She nodded, breathing slowly. In her mind, she replayed everything that had brought her here, the sound of the ticket tearing, her father's calm defiance, Nancy's trembling apology, the small victories that followed. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was something far messier and far more human. From the front row, Marcus Carter watched quietly. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes held pride. To him, this wasn't just his daughter giving a speech. It was a moment of completion. The girl who once stood powerless at a gate was now standing at a podium of her own. The host's voice echoed across the hall. "Please welcome Leila Carter." Applause filled the room, loud but respectful. Leila walked to the stage, the heels of her shoes clicking softly against the floor. She stopped behind the microphone, smiled once, and waited for the noise to fade. 3 months ago, she began. I learned that sometimes a single moment can split your life in two, the part before and the part after. The audience fell silent. For me, that moment was a sound, just paper tearing, a ticket ripped in half, but it wasn't really about the ticket. It was about what people see when they look at someone like me, or maybe what they don't see. Her voice was clear, warm, unhurried. She didn't sound angry. She sounded truthful. I could tell you that it was humiliating, that I felt small, and that would be true. But I could also tell you something else, that it taught me grace. The kind my father lives by every day. The kind that doesn't shout, doesn't shame, but still stands tall. Marcus's hands folded loosely in his lap. He felt the words settle over him like soft waves. Leila continued. When the video went viral, I thought the world would just move on after a few days. But it didn't. It started a conversation. And that conversation made people uncomfortable. It made me uncomfortable too. But maybe that's the point. Comfort never changed anyone. She paused, scanning the faces before her. My father always says the sky belongs to everyone. He built an airline on that idea. But sometimes we forget that fairness doesn't end when the plane lands. It has to live in every interaction, every choice, every person we meet. The crowd was utterly silent now. A journalist lowered his camera, choosing to listen instead of record. I'm not here to tell you I'm brave, Leila said. I'm not. I was scared that day. I'm still scared sometimes. But courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing to be kind when you have every reason not to be. A small murmur of agreement moved through the room. She smiled gently. If one person can look at another differently because of this story, then the pain was worth it. If one person can stop judging long enough to ask a question instead, then maybe we're flying a little higher as people. From somewhere in the back, a woman stood and began clapping. Others followed. The applause grew, not a roar, but something sincere and rhythmic, like a heartbeat. Leila waited, then added softly, "The truth is, no one owns the sky. We just share it for a while. Let's make that time count." When she stepped away from the podium, Marcus rose to his feet. The audience joined him in a standing ovation that felt endless. Cameras flashed, but Leila's eyes were on her father. He mouthed one word, proud. Afterward, as guests mingled and reporters gathered quotes, Leila slipped out to the quiet hallway. She leaned against a wall, letting her pulse slow down. Marcus found her there a few minutes later, his jacket over one arm. "You did it," he said simply. She smiled. "I didn't faint. That's progress." He chuckled softly. "You did more than speak. Leila, you healed something." She tilted her head, healed what he thought for a moment, maybe a small piece of the world. Before she could respond, a familiar voice called out, "Miss Carter." They both turned. It was Nancy Shaw again, standing at the end of the corridor with a badge that read Volunteer Coordinator. She looked calmer now, more grounded. Leila blinked in surprise. "You're working the event." Nancy nodded. "Project Equilibrium partnered with my community center. We brought some of our kids here today. They're in the back, helping with registration. They've never been on a plane before, but they believe they can be flight attendants now, or pilots." Leila felt her chest tighten. "That's wonderful. Nancy." Nancy smiled. "You did that?" Leila shook her head. "We all did." Marcus extended his hand. Good to see you again, Miss Shaw." She took it firmly this time. "Thank you for giving me a second chance, sir. I won't waste it." As Nancy walked away, Marcus looked at his daughter. "You know, forgiveness is harder than revenge." Leila's smile was small but certain. "That's why it works better." Later that night, father and daughter sat on the rooftop terrace of the hotel. The city lights shimmered below like an ocean of stars. Marcus leaned back, watching planes cross the sky. "You've changed more than you realize," he said. "So have you," she replied. "You used to hate the spotlight." "I still do," he admitted with a grin. "But some stories need to be seen." Leila rested her chin on her hands. "Do you think it'll last, the change? I mean..." Marcus took a long breath before answering. Change never lasts by accident. It lasts because people keep choosing it. She nodded, letting the quiet stretch between them. Far above, a plane blinked red and white as it disappeared into the dark. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The next morning, the headlines read, "Leila Carter inspires thousands," with message of grace and equality. The clip of her speech was everywhere shared, quoted, replayed, in classrooms, offices, even church services. People repeated her words. Courage is choosing to be kind when you have every reason not to be. At Ether Sky headquarters, employees hung a framed photo of that moment, the young woman standing on stage, light haloing her face. Beneath it, a small plaque read, "Dignity has no class." And across the world, in airports and airplanes, something subtle began to shift. Attendants greeted passengers with a little more patience. Travelers looked at each other with a little more understanding. It wasn't a revolution shouted through microphones. It was quieter than that, but real. As the day ended, Marcus and Leila boarded a late flight home. The cabin lights dimmed, and the hum of the engines filled the silence. Leila looked out at the endless darkness beyond the window. Her reflection stared back older somehow, surer. She turned to her father and whispered, "You were right about what he asked. That dignity reminds others we're strong enough not to lose ourselves." He smiled, reached over, and took her hand. "Then I guess you learned the right lesson." Outside, the clouds glowed faintly beneath the moon. The plane climbed higher, leaving the city lights behind, gliding toward the quiet horizon where new beginnings always waited. The night after the conference, the air outside the hotel was cool and alive with the hum of the city. Leila and Marcus left quietly, avoiding the media waiting at the lobby doors. The driver guided the black sedan through the streets of downtown Los Angeles, past glowing billboards and late-night diners. Leila leaned her head against the window, watching the blur of lights rush by. It felt unreal, like she was floating between two worlds, the one she used to know and the one her story had created. At the airport, a few passengers recognized them, but no one approached. There was something about the way Marcus carried himself calm, reserved, private that kept people at a respectful distance. As they reached the boarding gate, a young agent smiled warmly. "Welcome back, Mr. Carter. Miss Carter, your flight to New York is ready when you are." Leila smiled back, remembering the last time she'd stood in front of a gate agent. The memory of a ripped ticket still flickered somewhere deep in her mind. But it didn't sting anymore. It had transformed into something else, fuel for change, proof of growth. Once seated in first class, she slipped off her shoes and sighed softly. The engines hummed low as passengers boarded. Outside the window, the runway lights stretched like veins of gold across the dark. Marcus closed his eyes briefly, his hands resting on his lap. "You did well today," he said quietly. "Thanks," Leila whispered. "But it's strange. The more people talk about what happened, the less it feels like it belongs to me." He turned his head slightly toward her. "That's what stories do. The moment you share them, they stop being yours alone. They become part of everyone who listens." She thought about that for a moment, then nodded. "That's a little scary." He smiled faintly. "It's also how you change the world." The plane began to taxi. As it lifted off, Leila felt her chest lighten with each second. The clouds swallowed the city below, and soon the world was a stretch of soft gray and moonlight. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in months, she felt peace. Not victory, not closure, just peace. Hours later, as dawn painted the sky above New York in pale gold, Marcus and Leila arrived home. Their townhouse in Brooklyn Heights sat quiet and dignified, surrounded by trees just beginning to bloom. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar and coffee. Marcus set his briefcase on the counter and looked at his daughter with a mixture of exhaustion and pride. "Rest," he said. "You've earned it." But Leila didn't go straight to bed. She wandered into the living room, where a wall of framed photos told the story of their family: her parents' wedding, her first school play, the opening day of Ether Sky's first flight to Europe. She stopped at a picture of herself as a child sitting in the cockpit beside her father, both of them smiling. She remembered that day the smell of fuel, the excitement of feeling weightless, and how her father had told her, "You don't need wings to fly, just courage." That same courage had carried her through everything. Later that week, life seemed to settle into a strange new rhythm. Interviews, podcasts, and news outlets continued to request appearances, but Leila declined most of them. She didn't want the fame. She wanted the work. Project Equilibrium had now expanded beyond Ether Sky, with other airlines reaching out to adopt similar programs. Schools requested materials to teach empathy in their leadership courses. The movement was spreading like quiet wildfire. One morning, Leila received an email from a university in London inviting her to speak about the moral economy of modern leadership. She smiled, amused at the formality of the title, but as she read further, one line caught her attention. "Your story has inspired students to rethink what power means in the 21st century." That same afternoon, she shared the message with her father. He read it, looked up, and said simply, "You should go." "I thought you'd say that," she said, smiling. A few weeks later, she found herself in a London lecture hall filled with young faces, curious eyes, and open notebooks. She told her story again, not the viral version, not the media version, but the human version. She spoke about fear, grace, and the quiet strength it takes to forgive. When she finished, a student in the front row raised his hand and asked, "Do you ever wish it hadn't happened?" Leila paused. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but then I think about what came after, the people who found hope because of it. So no, I don't regret it. Pain can be a terrible teacher, but it teaches truth." After the lecture, several students stayed behind to thank her. One young woman, her voice trembling, said, "My mom's a flight attendant. She faced a lot of what you did. Thank you for giving her hope." Leila smiled and hugged her gently. "Tell her to keep flying," she said. "The sky's big enough for all of us." Back in New York, Marcus watched the movement grow from his office window overlooking the East River. The company was changing slowly, but unmistakably. Reports showed higher employee satisfaction, fewer customer complaints, more internal promotions from diverse backgrounds. But for Marcus, the numbers mattered less than the stories. Every week, letters arrived from passengers sharing moments of kindness they'd experienced on Aether Sky flights. One man wrote about a flight attendant who sat beside him during turbulence, calming his fear. A mother wrote about how her daughter with autism was treated with care and dignity. These were small things, but they mattered. One evening, Marcus received a letter from a name he hadn't expected to see, Nancy Shaw. It was handwritten, elegant in its simplicity. Mr. Carter, I wanted you to know that I've been accepted into the Diversity Leadership Program at Aether Sky's community branch. I'm training to mentor new hires on empathy and service. Thank you for believing I could change. I won't waste this chance. Marcus smiled to himself and folded the letter carefully. Redemption, he thought, was always worth the wait. Later that night, Leila joined him on the balcony. A blanket draped over her shoulders, the city glowed below like a constellation. "Dad," she said softly, "do you ever think about where we'd be if that day hadn't happened?" He sipped his coffee before answering. "Maybe we'd still be flying, but not this high." Leila chuckled quietly. "That's poetic." He looked at her with a small grin. "It's also true." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the distant sounds of traffic, the faint echo of sirens, the soft pulse of a living city. Then Marcus spoke again, his tone thoughtful. "You know, Leila, change doesn't come from the noise. It comes from the echo, the part that stays after the noise fades." She looked out at the skyline, the Statue of Liberty faintly visible in the distance. "Then I hope our echo's a long one," she said. "It already is," he replied. That night, as Leila prepared for bed, she checked her phone one last time. There was a new message in her inbox from a high school teacher in Atlanta. It read, "We watched your speech in class today. One of my students, who used to think she'd never fit in anywhere, says she wants to work in aviation now. She says, if Leila Carter can stand up for herself, maybe I can too. Thank you." Leila smiled, eyes wet with quiet tears. She turned off the light, crawled into bed, and whispered into the dark. Then it was all worth it. Outside her window, a plane crossed the night sky, its lights glimmering like a promise. Somewhere, someone was traveling home, and maybe, just maybe they'd arrive with a little more kindness than before. Summer arrived with a restlessness that hung over the city like thick air before a thunderstorm. Aether Sky was thriving publicly, but behind the scenes, not everything was smooth. With growth came scrutiny. Competitors whispered that Marcus Carter's reforms were a public relations stunt. Some shareholders questioned the time and money spent on empathy training instead of expansion. Reporters began digging for controversy, trying to turn inspiration into scandal. And at the center of it all was Leila, still young, still learning, but suddenly the face of a movement she had never intended to lead. It started with an article in a major news outlet. The headline read, "Airline Heiress Uses Viral Incident for Personal Fame." The story twisted her words, pulled quotes from her speeches out of context, and suggested that her activism was just a branding strategy. Leila read it on her phone one morning while waiting in a cafe near the university. Her hands shook. People glanced at her as she scrolled. their whispers just low enough to sting. She put the phone down and stared at her reflection in the window. For the first time since everything began, she wondered if she had made a mistake speaking out. When she got home, Marcus was already aware. His assistant, Chloe Ramirez, had sent him the link hours earlier. He found Leila pacing in the living room, her expression torn between anger and confusion. "They twisted everything," she said, her voice trembling. "They said I'm profiting off pain, that I'm just another privileged kid pretending to care." Marcus listened quietly before speaking. People who don't understand purpose will always assume it's profit. You can't control what they write. You can only control what you do next. She sat down on the couch, deflated, but it hurts. I worked so hard to do this right, to make it real. "I know," he said softly, "and that's exactly why it is real." The days that followed were heavy. Online debates raged. Some defended her, others attacked. The same platforms that once celebrated her story now flooded her with skepticism. Even some employees at EtherSky began to question whether the Carter family's involvement blurred personal and professional lines. One afternoon, during a leadership meeting at headquarters, Marcus noticed the shift. The room, once united, now felt divided. Executives murmured about costs, deadlines, and brand fatigue. Finally, one of them spoke up. "With respect, Marcus," said a middle-aged board member, "this focus on emotion, it's not sustainable. We're an airline, not a charity." Marcus leaned forward, calm but firm. "We're in the business of people. Planes has just happened to be how we connect them." Another executive sighed. "It's idealistic. The media's starting to turn on us. Maybe it's time to move on from this chapter." The words hung heavy in the air. Marcus didn't argue further, but he didn't agree either. After the meeting, he walked out onto the rooftop terrace of the building. The city stretched beneath him, alive and indifferent. Chloe followed quietly, holding 2 cups of coffee. "They're scared," she said, handing him one. "I know," he replied, "but fear has never built anything worth keeping." That evening, Leila joined him in the same spot. She looked pale, drained. "Dad, maybe they're right. Maybe I should step back. Let things cool off." He shook his head. "No, you step back when you stop believing, not when it gets uncomfortable." She looked at him with tears forming. "I didn't sign up for this kind of hate." He placed a hand on her shoulder. "No one ever does. But you have to remember, real change doesn't come gift-wrapped. It comes with resistance. The same sky that carries our planes also brings storms. You can't fly without learning to navigate both." His words lingered long after they went back inside. That night, as Leila lay awake, she read through hundreds of messages, some cruel, some kind. One caught her attention. It was from a young flight attendant in training. "Miss Carter, I just wanted to say your story saved my dream. I was about to quit because I didn't think someone like me belonged in aviation, but seeing you fight with grace made me want to stay. Thank you." Leila read the message 3 times, then set her phone down and stared at the ceiling. Maybe her father was right. Maybe storms were part of the flight path. The next day, she called Chloe. "Can you set up a company-wide meeting? I need to talk to everyone, pilots, attendants, ground crew, everyone." When the day came, hundreds gathered in the main hangar. Planes loomed in the background, engines silent, wings gleaming under bright lights. Leila stood on a small stage, her voice echoing through the vast space. "I know things have been tough lately," she began. "You've heard things. You've read things. Maybe some of you are wondering if all this effort, this talk about empathy, inclusion, fairness was ever worth it." She paused, scanning the faces before her. "I can't tell you what to believe, but I can tell you why I still believe. Because I've seen what happens when we treat people right. I've seen a flight attendant hold a stranger's hand through turbulence. I've seen ground crew skip meals to reunite a lost child with his parents. And I've seen this company, this family turn one act of cruelty into a movement for kindness." The room was silent except for the distant hum of the ventilation system. "So, if you're tired," she said, her tone softening, "I get it. But please don't give up. Not on each other. Not on what we started." When she finished, there was no applause at first. Then one pair of hands clapped, then another and another, until the hangar filled with sound. Marcus stood at the edge of the crowd, pride shining in his eyes. That night, footage of her speech spread online. It wasn't part of any PR plan. An employee had filmed it on their phone and uploaded it. The clip showed her standing small but steady before hundreds of employees, speaking from the heart. The caption read, "When leaders talk about love, not numbers." Within days, the same outlets that had criticized her began sharing her words again, not as scandal, but as substance. People quoted her line about turning cruelty into kindness. The noise started to quiet. The storm, it seemed, was passing. A week later, EtherSky announced record satisfaction ratings and new partnerships with international organizations promoting workplace equality. Marcus didn't boast about it. He simply smiled when he read the internal report and said to Chloe, "Looks like the sky cleared." That evening, he found Leila sitting on the balcony, watching the sunset. The golden light bathed her face, calm and content. "You were right," she said softly. "Storms don't last." He sat beside her. "No, but they teach you how to fly better." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "I think I understand now why you love flying so much. It's not the planes. It's the perspective." He smiled, looking out at the horizon. "Exactly. Up there, the world looks smaller, but the possibilities feel endless." As darkness settled, the first stars appeared over the skyline, somewhere in the distance. A jet climbed higher into the night. For Marcus and Leila Carter, the turbulence had passed, but the journey was far from over. What had started as a torn ticket had become a blueprint for resilience, a reminder that even in a world of noise and doubt, integrity could still soar. And as the wind carried the faint sound of another departing flight, Leila whispered to herself, "Let them talk. I'll keep flying." Autumn painted the city in copper and gold. The wind off the Hudson carried that unmistakable chill that meant summer had truly gone. From the large windows of EtherSky headquarters, the skyline shimmered under a pale sun. Inside, the atmosphere was different, now steadier, lighter, as if the company itself had taken a deep breath after months of turbulence. Leila stood in the atrium, watching employees pass by, chatting, laughing, living, for the first time in what felt like forever. She saw joy that wasn't forced. Change had settled in quietly, not through press releases or campaigns, but through people simply choosing to treat each other better. She was there to meet her father for a small internal event, a ceremony to honor the staff who had gone above and beyond during the year. But What she didn't know was that something much bigger was about to happen. Marcus Carter had always been a man of surprises, but subtle ones, the kind that didn't come with confetti or cameras, just purpose. Today, he wore his usual charcoal suit, but there was a glint in his eyes that hinted at something special. When he saw his daughter approach, he smiled. "Ready?" he asked. "As I'll ever be," she said with a small laugh. They walked together into the hall. It wasn't a grand stage, just a modest setup with rows of seats, a small podium, and a backdrop that read Ether Sky Family Recognition Ceremony. The word family was deliberate. Marcus had insisted on it. The event began smoothly short speeches, applause, heartfelt stories. Employees spoke about acts of kindness that had changed their lives. One attendant told how a passenger with anxiety had written a thank you letter that became her most treasured possession. Another talked about mentoring a new hire from a different background, saying it had reminded him why he loved his job in the first place. When the time came for Marcus to speak, the room fell silent. His voice, calm and measured as always, filled the space. "When we started this journey," he said, "we didn't know where it would take us. We only knew it had to begin with one simple truth: people deserve dignity. All people, no exceptions." He paused, looking around. Ether Sky has weathered storms before, but this one was different. It wasn't about business. It was about who we are when no one is watching. And I'm proud, deeply proud to say we chose empathy. The applause was warm and lasting. Leila's heart swelled as she watched him speak. But then Marcus turned slightly toward her, and the tone of his voice shifted. "There's someone here who reminded us all of what that word means. Someone who faced humiliation and chose not to respond with anger, but with grace. Someone who showed the world that strength doesn't need to shout." Leila froze. She realized too late that every eye in the room had turned toward her. "Leila Carter," Marcus said with a smile. "Please come up here." Her hands trembled slightly as she stood, feeling both proud and shy under the applause that filled the room. She walked up to the stage, and her father placed a hand on her shoulder. "You didn't just inspire this company," he said quietly, his voice catching just a little. "You changed it. You changed me." There was a brief silence, the kind that feels sacred. Then Marcus lifted something from the podium, a small, framed piece of paper sealed under glass. Leila's breath caught. It was her torn ticket, perfectly mended with gold lines running through the tear. The kintsugi-like repair shimmered under the lights. Marcus handed it to her. "This," he said softly, "reminds us that broken things can become even more beautiful when we choose to repair them with purpose." The crowd stood, applauding again, some wiping tears from their eyes. Leila's throat tightened. She managed to smile, though her vision blurred. "Thank you, Dad," she whispered. Later, after the event, she slipped out to the balcony overlooking the river. The air was crisp, the city glowing beneath the setting sun. She ran her fingers over the golden seams of the framed ticket. It felt warm, alive with memory. Nancy Shaw appeared beside her, her expression gentle. She had been reinstated in the company's training department months ago and had since become one of its most respected mentors. "That's beautiful," Nancy said softly, nodding toward the frame. Leila smiled faintly. "Yeah, it's strange how something that hurt so much can end up meaning so much more." Nancy nodded. "That's life, I guess. The pain makes the purpose clearer." They stood in silence for a while, watching a plane cut through the sky in the distance. You know, Nancy continued, I used to think being wrong was the worst thing that could happen to me, but now I think staying the same after realizing you're wrong, that's worse. Leila turned to her, eyes soft. You've come a long way. Nancy smiled. So have you. Later that evening, father and daughter had dinner at their favorite small restaurant near the Brooklyn Bridge. It was quiet, candlelit, and the hum of the city life just beyond the window. Marcus raised his glass of sparkling water. To the sky, he said. Leila raised hers. To the sky. He grinned. Still learning from it always, she said. It's big enough to hold everything, dreams, mistakes, second chances. Marcus nodded slowly. You know, your mother would have been proud of you. Words hit softly, but deep. Leila smiled, her eyes glistening. I hope so. When they finished dinner, they walked along the bridge in the cool night air. The city lights reflected off the river like molten gold. Leila listened to the rhythmic sound of their footsteps, the occasional laughter of strangers passing by. Dad, she said after a while, do you ever think people will forget the story? I mean, he looked at her thoughtfully. People don't forget truth. Leila, they might stop talking about it, but it stays with them. It changes the way they see the world, even if just a little. She nodded, taking that in. Then, I guess that's enough. It is, he said. That's all change ever needs to be, a little at a time. As they reached the middle of the bridge, the wind picked up, carrying with it the faint sound of a departing plane overhead. They both looked up instinctively. The lights blinked against the dark sky, steady, unwavering. Leila smiled to herself. Still my favorite sound. Mine too, Marcus replied. In that moment, everything, the pain, the noise, the doubt felt small compared to what they had built. A simple story that had grown into a lesson shared across continents. Airlines from Europe to Asia had adopted similar empathy programs. Universities had added case studies about leadership born from humility. And, every now and then, Leila received letters from strangers who said her story had changed how they treated people. One from a retired pilot read, You reminded me why I started flying in the first place. Another from a mother said, My daughter wants to work in aviation now. She says she wants to be like you. Leila kept every one of them in a small wooden box on her desk. She didn't reread them often, but just knowing they were there made her feel anchored, connected. That night, as she and her father watched the last plane disappear into the horizon, Marcus spoke softly. You know, someday people will tell this story, and they'll forget it started with a torn ticket. They'll just remember what it stood for. Leila nodded, her eyes fixed on the sky. Then maybe that's the best kind of legacy, the kind that outgrows the pain that made it. The wind brushed past them, cool and gentle, carrying away the echoes of laughter, of lessons, of love. Somewhere high above, another flight crossed the stars, carrying strangers who would never know the story of the girl whose ticket was torn. But they would still be part of the world she helped heal. And, as the night deepened, Leila whispered the words she always remembered from her father. The air doesn't discriminate, neither should we. The winter winds came early that year. Frost traced patterns across the windows of the Carter family townhouse, and the city outside pulsed with the glow of holiday lights. The world had changed a lot since that day at the airport, and so had Leila. She wasn't just the girl from the viral story anymore. She was a speaker, a mentor, and, somehow, a symbol of quiet resilience that reached far beyond her age. Yet, even with all that, she never let the noise get to her. She still rode the subway sometimes, still stopped at the same corner cafe for her favorite caramel latte, still found peace walking by the East River in the mornings. Life, in its ordinary rhythm, kept her grounded. But on a cold Tuesday afternoon, something unexpected arrived at her door. It was a thick, cream-colored envelope with no return address. Her name was written in careful cursive across the front, Miss Leila Carter. The paper felt heavy, like it carried more than words. When she opened it, a small photograph slipped out, an old photo of a young woman in a crisp flight attendant uniform from the 1980s. Tucked behind it was a handwritten note. "Dear Miss Carter, you don't know me, but I knew your mother. She trained me on my first day at Ether Sky. She believed in kindness above all. I thought you'd want to know that her example still guides me today. If you're ever near Chicago, I'd love to tell you a story she never got to finish. Grace Thompson." Leila read the note twice, her chest tightening. Her mother, Dana Carter, had died when Leila was 12. She remembered fragments her laughter, the smell of her perfume, the way she used to hum while cooking breakfast, but there were many things she never got to ask. And now, someone from her mother's past was reaching out. That evening, she showed the letter to Marcus. He read it silently, his eyes softening. "Grace Thompson," he murmured. "I haven't heard that name in years." "You knew her?" Leila asked. He nodded slowly. "She worked with your mom before you were born. They were close. When Dana passed, Grace moved away. I didn't realize she was still with the company back then." Leila looked at the note again, then back at her father. "I think I need to meet her." Marcus hesitated for a moment, then smiled. "Then you should. Some stories are meant to find you." 2 weeks later, Leila found herself standing in the quiet terminal of Chicago O'Hare Airport. Snow drifted softly outside the glass walls, and the intercom announced delayed flights in that familiar, weary tone. She spotted an older woman waiting near a cafe, short, silver hair, warm brown skin, and eyes that seemed to recognize Leila before she even spoke. "Grace Thompson?" Leila asked gently. The woman stood and smiled. "And you must be Dana's little girl. You look just like her." They sat together, 2 generations bound by memory. Grace ordered tea, Leila coffee, and for a moment they simply studied each other, the way strangers do when they realize they share the same ghosts. "I wanted to thank you for riding," Leila said softly. "It means a lot." Grace smiled faintly. "Your mother was one of the kindest people I ever met. When others saw flying as a job, she saw it as a privilege to serve people, to make them feel seen. She believed every passenger carried a story, and our job was to respect it." Leila listened, her throat tightening. "She used to tell me something like that when I was little. That kindness doesn't have to be loud to be strong." Grace's eyes glistened. She said that all the time. "You know, there's something she never told the company, something only a few of us knew. The day she trained me, we had a passenger who became very sick mid-flight. It was chaos. The man's wife was crying, the crew was panicking, but your mother stayed calm. She comforted the woman, held her hand, and made her promise that everything would be all right. That man survived. But what stayed with me wasn't just what she did. It was how she made everyone else calm enough to help. That was her gift. She carried Grace like oxygen. Leila felt tears burn at the corners of her eyes. I wish I remembered her like that. Grace reached across the table and placed her hand over Leila's. You do. It's in you. I saw your speech online, the one about choosing kindness. That's her voice, honey. You're just carrying it forward. Leila couldn't speak for a moment. The hum of the airport around them faded, and for a second, it was as if her mother were sitting there with them, smiling quietly. Grace leaned back, her tone softening. There's one more thing I wanted to give you. She pulled a small envelope from her purse. Inside was an old letter, yellowed with time. The ink had faded, but the handwriting was unmistakably delicate. Leila unfolded it carefully. The first line read, "For Leila. When you're old enough to understand." Her breath caught. This is from her? Grace nodded. She wrote it before you were born. Asked me to keep it safe in case life got in the way. Leila's hand shook as she began to read. My sweet Leila, if you're reading this, it means I couldn't tell you in person. I want you to know that the sky I love so much isn't about flying. It's about perspective. Up there, you see how small things can still hold so much beauty. Don't let the world make you hard, even when people are unkind, even when they forget your worth. Remember this, you come from love, and love will always be louder than hate. By the time she reached the end, tears were spilling freely down her cheeks. Grace reached into her bag and handed her a tissue, smiling sadly. She would be proud of you, Grace said quietly. Everything you've done, everything you've stood for, it's what she dreamed people would do someday. Leila folded the letter carefully and held it to her chest. Thank you, she whispered. After they parted, she sat by the terminal window for a long time, watching planes rise into the snowy sky. Her reflection in the glass looked different, now older, softer, more whole. For years, she had carried her mother's absence like a shadow. Now she carried her presence instead. When she returned to New York, Marcus was waiting at the gate. He didn't say anything at first, just wrapped her in a long, quiet hug. She left me a letter, Leila said finally. Grace kept it all these years. Marcus closed his eyes, nodding slowly. Your mother always knew how to leave light behind. That night, Leila placed the letter beside the framed golden ticket on her desk. 2 pieces of her story, one from a moment of pain, one from a legacy of love, now sat side by side. And as she looked at them, she realized something simple but profound. The story that began with the torn ticket wasn't just about injustice anymore. It was about inheritance, the kind that isn't made of money or status, but of values passed quietly from one heart to another. Outside, the city shimmered beneath a dusting of snow. Somewhere above it, a plane roared through the clouds, carving its path across the winter sky. Leila watched it disappear into the distance, a soft smile touching her lips. Mom, she whispered, I get it now. The sky was never just yours. It's ours. Snow still lined the sidewalks of Brooklyn when the letter from Chicago found its place beside the golden-framed ticket on Leila Carter's desk. Every night before bed she would glance at both, reminders of where she'd come from and why she kept going. The world had quieted since the whirlwind of interviews and headlines, but quiet, she'd learned, didn't mean still. It meant space to grow, to dream, to listen. A few months later, Ether Sky prepared to celebrate its 50th anniversary. The company was planning a global gala, inviting former employees, partners, and leaders from across the industry. Marcus Carter wanted the event to be more than a milestone. He wanted it to be a statement, a symbol of how far they'd come and where they were heading next. One evening in early spring, he found Leila reading by the window. "We need to talk about the keynote," he said, leaning against the door frame. She looked up from her book, amused. "You're not asking me to write it, are you?" He smiled. "Actually, I'm asking you to deliver it." Her eyes widened. "Me dad, this is your event. You built the airline." He walked over, placing a hand on her shoulder. "No. Leila, we built what it stands for. You gave it heart. They need to hear that voice yours, not mine." She hesitated, heart fluttering between pride and fear. "What do you want me to say?" "Whatever's true," he answered simply. Weeks passed, and the gala approached. Reporters speculated about big announcements, rumors of new routes, new jets, even partnerships with sustainability groups. But for Leila, the speech wasn't about expansion or profit. It was about connection, the invisible thread tying one act of grace to another. The night of the event arrived. The ballroom shimmered under crystal chandeliers, the city skyline glowing through floor-to-ceiling windows. Guests from every corner of the world filled the room, pilots in pressed uniforms, attendants in elegant dresses, executives in suits, and journalists ready with cameras. Marcus greeted each guest with his usual composure, but when he saw Leila step in, he froze for a second. She wore a midnight blue gown, simple yet strong, the kind that made her look timeless. For a moment, he saw her mother in her, the same quiet confidence, the same light in her eyes. The evening unfolded with music and laughter, a celebration of journeys completed and those yet to come. When it was time for the keynote, Marcus walked to the microphone. "Tonight," he began, "we honor 50 years of flight, 50 years of sky and soul. But the most important part of any journey is not the aircraft, it's the people who keep it in the air." He paused, smiling at his daughter. "So, for our final word tonight, I'd like to invite someone who reminds us what those skies truly mean. Miss Leila Carter." Applause filled the hall. Leila took the stage, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. For a moment, she just looked at the crowd faces from every background, every story, and then she began. 50 years ago, this company started with a dream that the sky belonged to everyone. My father built it on that idea, and my mother lived by it. She believed kindness could travel farther than any airplane. I didn't understand that fully until one day someone tore up my ticket. The room fell completely silent. That moment, she continued, was supposed to break me, but instead it showed me something. It showed me how powerful grace can be when it stands next to injustice and refuses to step aside. That torn ticket didn't end my journey. It started one. Her voice strengthened. In the years since, I've seen how one act of courage can ripple farther than you can imagine. I've met people who told me that story changed how they treat others. I've met people who said it made them see themselves differently. And that's when I realized the sky isn't just where we travel. It's what connects us. Every flight, every kindness, every apology, every second chance, they're all part of the same sky. The audience listened without breathing. Even the waitstaff had stopped moving. Leila took a slow breath. "So, tonight, as we celebrate 50 years, I want to ask one thing. Keep flying, yes, but fly for something bigger than yourself. Fly with grace, because someday, someone will remember not how high you went, but how gently you lifted them. When she stepped away from the microphone, the room erupted in applause, the kind that feels like thunder wrapped in warmth. Marcus stood, tears glistening at the corners of his eyes. He joined her on stage, pulling her into an embrace that said everything words couldn't. Later that night, as the crowd mingled, an unfamiliar man approached Leila. He was middle-aged, dressed modestly, carrying a folder. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice low but steady, "I don't think you remember me, but I was there that day at the gate. I was the man with the laptop, the one who looked away when it happened." Leila's breath caught. I do remember. You didn't say anything." He nodded, shame flickering in his eyes. "I didn't. I told myself it wasn't my business, but that day haunted me. When your story came out, I saw my silence in it. It made me change. I left my job and started teaching ethics and customer service. I tell your story to every class. I just wanted to thank you and to say I'm sorry." Leila felt her throat tighten. She smiled gently. "Thank you for telling me. Sometimes silence speaks louder than words, but so does growth." He nodded, eyes wet, and slipped back into the crowd. When the night ended, Marcus and Leila stepped onto the terrace overlooking the city. The noise of celebration drifted faintly behind them. Below, New York stretched endlessly, lights blinking like constellations. Marcus broke the silence. "Your mother would have loved that speech." Leila smiled. I felt her there, every word. They stood together, hands resting on the cold railing. The sky above was clear, stars faint but visible through the city haze. "Dad," she said softly, "I think I understand now why people say time heals. It's not that pain disappears, it's that love outlasts it." He turned toward her, his voice warm. "Exactly. Pain teaches, love endures, and if you carry both with grace, you'll never lose your direction." Inside the ballroom, the music started again. Nancy Shaw, now head of Ether Sky's training academy, gathered a group of new recruits. She pointed toward the window where Leila and Marcus stood. "You see them," she said. "That's why we do this, because dignity is contagious." The young recruits nodded, some smiling, others wide-eyed. They didn't know the full story. Not yet, but they would. As the night deepened, Leila returned to her suite and placed the speech notes next to her mother's letter. She whispered softly, "This one's for you." Then she opened her laptop and began writing something new, a curriculum for Ether Sky's next program. One focused entirely on emotional intelligence in service leadership. It would later become known as the Grace Project, a movement adopted by airlines around the world. When dawn broke over the city, Marcus found her still typing, eyes bright despite the hour. "You never sleep after speeches," he teased. She smiled without looking up. "Can't help it. The world feels lighter when people listen." He chuckled. "Then keep speaking. Leila, the sky's still listening too." Outside, the first flight of the morning streaked across the horizon, its vapor trail catching the sunrise. For Leila Carter, it was more than just another plane. It was a reminder that from one torn ticket had come 1,000 journeys toward understanding. And as long as there were skies to cross, she'd keep flying. Spring melted gently into summer, and with it came a new energy that buzzed through Ether Sky's corridors. Posters of smiling employees appeared across terminals with a simple tagline in clean white letters, "Fly with Grace." It was more than a slogan. Now it was a mission. What began as Leila's late-night idea had grown into the company's most ambitious program in decades. The Grace Project was ready for takeoff. Every department had a hand in it. Engineers, pilots, and cabin crews attended workshops that focused not on procedures, but on empathy listening, de-escalation, understanding. Airports from New York to Nairobi hung banners announcing the rollout. The world was watching, and for the first time in a long time, the headlines about airlines were about humanity, not controversy. Leila woke before sunrise every day, coffee in hand, reviewing feedback from different hubs. She spent her mornings on video calls with training teams in other countries and her evenings visiting airports in person. She had stopped counting the hours. What mattered was the movement itself. One morning, as she watched employees file into a packed training room at JFK, she felt something deeper than pride. She felt purpose. A familiar voice broke her thoughts. "They're here because they believe in what you started," Marcus said, stepping beside her. He had that same calm smile he always wore before big moments. "They're here because they want to be better," Leila replied quietly. He nodded. "Same thing, isn't it?" The session began. At the front stood Nancy Shaw, her voice confident as she shared stories of real incidents, moments when small acts of kindness had defused chaos. She spoke not like a manager, but like someone who had lived the lessons she taught. The trainees listened, some leaning forward, others scribbling notes. When she finished, she looked toward Leila. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "this program exists because someone refused to let anger define her story. Meet Leila Carter." Applause filled the room. Leila stepped forward, her heart fluttering as always when faced with a crowd. "You've all read about what happened to me," she began, "but I want you to know it's not just my story. It's every story where someone was made to feel small and chose to stand tall instead. Grace isn't weakness, it's strength under control. And when you bring that into your work, you change everything." Afterward, employees lined up to shake her hand. One of them, a young attendant named Sam Rodriguez, looked nervous. "I joined last year," he said softly. "My first week, a passenger cursed at me because of my accent. I wanted to yell back. Then I saw your interview and decided to breathe first. It worked. Thank you." Leila smiled. "You did that yourself, Sam. You chose grace." Those moments fueled her through long days and sleepless nights. But not everyone welcomed the change. Some older employees grumbled that feel-good training was a waste of time. One afternoon, during a board update, an executive voiced what others were thinking. "All this empathy talk is nice, but it slows operations. People fly for efficiency, not philosophy." Leila listened without flinching. When he finished, she spoke calmly. "Efficiency gets passengers where they're going. Empathy determines whether they ever want to come back. If we can do both, we win hearts and loyalty." Marcus met her eyes from across the table and gave the slightest nod. The debate ended there. Weeks later, she boarded a flight to Los Angeles to attend the program's West Coast launch, sitting by the window. She stared out at the clouds drifting like mountains of light. The seatbelt sign chimed, and for a moment she remembered that first flight years ago, the sound of tearing paper, the humiliation, the silence. Now she smiled at the irony. Life had a way of circling back, but softer each time. When they landed, the local team greeted her with flowers. Among them was Grace Thompson, flown in as a guest speaker. The reunion was warm, full of laughter and shared memories. During the evening session, Grace told her story to the staff about Leila Carter, the mentor who taught her kindness at 30,000 feet. "I used to think flying was about distance," Grace said, "but Dana showed me it's really about connection." Her daughter reminded us of that again. The crowd applauded, some with tears glimmering. After the event, Leila and Grace sat outside under a string of patio lights, the Pacific breeze cool against their skin. "You've turned pain into purpose," Grace said. "That's rarer than diamonds." Leila smiled. "I just followed what Mom started." Grace reached over, squeezing her hand. "Then keep following. The world needs it." By late summer, results began pouring in. Customer satisfaction soared. Complaints dropped by half. News outlets ran stories titled "How One Airline Made Kindness Trend." Again. But what touched Leila most were the letters from employees, handwritten, heartfelt, raw. One read, "I used to see passengers as problems to solve. Now I see them as people to help." Another said, "After 20 years in this job, I finally love it again." Marcus gathered the leadership team for a review. As he opened the meeting, he looked around the table. "We built jets that can cross oceans," he said. "But what Leila built crosses hearts. That's a longer flight." Everyone laughed softly, but there was pride in their eyes. For Marcus, watching his daughter lead reminded him of Dana, the same conviction, the same warmth that could turn a room of skeptics into believers. One afternoon, Leila received an email from an international partner airline in South Africa asking to license the Grace Project for their own training. The subject line read simply, "Inspired by your sky." She stared at it for a long moment, then forwarded it to her father with a single line, "Mom's sky just got bigger." His reply came minutes later. She'd be proud. As the program expanded globally, Leila began recording a short weekly video called Moments of Grace. In each episode, she shared real passenger stories, acts of empathy, humor, patience. The series went viral online, gathering millions of views. People left comments like, "This restored my faith in humanity." Others simply wrote, "I needed this today." But behind the screens and applause, Leila remained grounded. Some nights she still visited the airport cafe where everything had begun. The gate where her ticket was torn was now remodeled. Brighter, busier, but she would sit nearby, watching people rush and laugh and argue and reunite. Humanity in motion. She'd whisper to herself, "Look how far we've flown." One evening, as she sipped her latte, a small girl tugged at her sleeve. "Are you the lady from the videos?" the girl asked shyly. Leila smiled. "I might be. My mom says you make the planes nicer." The child said, "I like flying now." Leila felt her eyes sting. "That means the world to me, sweetheart." The girl grinned and ran back to her mother. Leila watched them board their flight, warmth spreading through her chest. Maybe this was what her mother meant all along. Kindness wasn't about grand gestures. It was about leaving the world a little lighter than you found it. That night, back home, she sat by her window again. The city hummed below, a living thing. The framed golden ticket caught the moonlight, its repaired seams gleaming softly. She opened her notebook and began to write the next chapter of the Grace Project, a version for schools and youth programs. "Because," she whispered, "if we teach them young enough, maybe they'll never have to unlearn empathy." Marcus knocked lightly before entering. Working late again, she smiled, "Just dreaming." He chuckled. That's how the best work starts. He looked at the framed ticket and the letter beside it, then at his daughter. You've done more than fix an airline. Leila, you've changed how people fly. She closed the notebook and leaned her head against his shoulder. We changed it. Dad, together, outside. A plane crossed the night sky, its lights blinking steady and true. Somewhere up there, passengers leaned against windows, gazing at the same stars. They'd never know this story in full, but they'd feel its echo in a smile from a flight attendant, in a calm voice during turbulence, in the quiet grace of being seen. And that, Leila thought, was enough. By autumn, the Grace Project had become more than a company initiative, it had turned into a global movement. Airports from Tokyo to Toronto adopted the training model, calling it a revolution in the skies. News anchors used phrases like the Leila effect and the empathy wave. Universities invited her to speak about leadership born from compassion. Even governments reached out, curious how an idea born from pain had redefined service worldwide. Leila Carter barely had time to catch her breath. One morning, she woke up in her Manhattan apartment, sunlight streaming through half-closed blinds. Her phone buzzed nonstop interview requests, invitations, articles. She turned it face down, sat on the edge of her bed, and exhaled slowly. Fame was a strange kind of noise, beautiful at first, then heavy once it echoed too long. Her father, Marcus, noticed. When he called that afternoon, his voice carried quiet concern. "You sound tired, sweetheart." "I'm fine," she replied softly. He chuckled gently. "You always say that when you're not." There was a pause. She stared out the window at the city moving below. "Dad, I wanted this to make a difference, but sometimes it feels like the story became bigger than the message." Marcus didn't rush his words. "Then remind them of the message. You don't have to chase the noise. Leila, just keep speaking the truth, and the right people will keep listening." His words grounded her again, like they always did. That evening, she went for a walk through Central Park, the leaves turning gold and red. A soft breeze rustled through the trees, and she thought about her mother's letter about perspective and the beauty of small things. She smiled to herself. Maybe, she thought, this was what grace felt like when it settled quietly inside you. A week later, Leila received an email from an international conference in Geneva. They were honoring her with the Global Humanitarian Leadership Award. At first, she hesitated. Awards never mattered to her. But then she thought of her team, of Nancy, Grace, Sam, her father, all the people who carried this story forward. It wasn't her award alone. When she arrived in Geneva, the city glowed beneath a pale morning sky. The event was held in a grand hall near the lake, surrounded by flags of every nation. As she walked in, flashes from cameras lit up like tiny bursts of lightning, but what caught her attention wasn't the attention. It was the faces of people who believed in something she had once only dreamed of. During her speech, she spoke simply. "This award isn't for me. It's for every person who decided that kindness still matters. My mother taught me that love will always be louder than hate. I believe that, and I think the world still believes it too." The audience rose to their feet. Some were crying, others smiling. Afterward, journalists asked her what came next. She answered, "We keep going." Grace doesn't stop at borders. Back in New York, the Grace Project was expanding faster than anyone expected. Schools started adapting the curriculum for young students. teaching emotional intelligence and inclusivity. One teacher from Atlanta wrote, "For the first time, my students see empathy as strength, not softness." That letter became Leila's favorite, but one afternoon, a message came that shook her in a different way. An email from Nancy Shaw. You might want to see this. Attached was a video from a small airport in Texas. It showed a flight attendant, a young black woman calmly de-escalating a tense passenger who had shouted racial slurs during boarding. The passenger eventually apologized publicly. The video went viral overnight. The attendant, interviewed later, said something that made Leila tear up instantly. I learned how to respond with grace instead of anger because I saw someone else do it first. That night, Leila called Nancy. This is it, isn't it?" she whispered. Nancy's voice trembled with emotion. "Yes, Leila, this is what you built. The story's no longer yours, it's everyone's." Leila didn't sleep much. She stayed up, watching the video over and over, listening to the calm tone of the young attendant, the soft steadiness in her eyes. It reminded her of her mother. It reminded her of that day at the airport, only this time. It ended differently. Days later, she flew to Dallas to meet the woman in the video. Her name was Aisha Bennett, 24, first-generation college graduate, newly hired at EtherSky. When they met, Aisha was nervous at first, fumbling with her words. "I don't know how to say this," Aisha said, "but you changed how I see myself. Before the Grace Project, I thought being kind meant being weak, but now it feels like power." Leila smiled softly. "It is power, Aisha, the kind the world doesn't always recognize right away." They sat together in the crew lounge, sharing stories, laughter, and quiet tears. When Leila left, she hugged Aisha tightly. "Keep flying with grace," she said. "The sky needs people like you." By winter, EtherSky launched a new documentary chronicling the story of the torn ticket and everything that came after. It aired on streaming platforms across the U.S., titled Grace in the Sky. Within days, millions watched. The film ended with real footage of the Grace Project in action crews helping passengers, smiling through storms, small acts that rippled like light through darkness. The final scene showed Leila reading her mother's letter aloud, her voice steady but full of emotion. "Don't let the world make you hard. Even when people forget your worth. Remember this, you come from love." When the screen faded to black, silence lingered before applause filled living rooms around the world. Hashtags flooded social media. Grace in the Sky, One Fly with Heart, Leila Carter. People began sharing their own stories of kindness. Some were small, paying for a stranger's coffee, comforting someone on a bus, but together they formed something vast. Marcus watched the documentary alone in his office that night. When the credits rolled, he leaned back, eyes glistening. "Dana," he whispered into the empty room, "our girl did it." A few weeks later, Leila was invited to Washington, D.C., for a private meeting with the Secretary of Transportation. They wanted to integrate empathy-based training across the entire U.S. aviation sector. It was an unprecedented move, and it all traced back to a single moment. A torn ticket. A choice not to respond with hate. After the meeting, she walked alone down the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. Tourists snapped photos nearby. Children laughed. Wind carried the faint scent of cherry blossoms. She sat on the steps for a long while, gazing at the reflecting pool shimmering under the setting sun. In that reflection, she saw two silhouettes her father's, her mother's always beside her, even when unseen. She closed her eyes and whispered softly, "We did it, and we're not done." That night, as her flight home cruised above the clouds, the cabin lights dimmed, passengers dozed, the sky outside vast and quiet. Leila looked out the window, endless black dotted with stars, and thought of all the lives touched, all the voices that joined the same chorus. Grace had become airborne. In the seat pocket in front of her, she found a folded note tucked between the magazines. It wasn't there when she boarded. Curious. She opened it. The handwriting was unfamiliar but elegant. "You don't know me, but I wanted to thank you. I was on your flight years ago. I saw what happened. I didn't stand up then, but because of you, I stand up now." She smiled through tears, folded the note, and tucked it into her journal beside her mother's letter. The sky outside shimmered faintly with morning light, and for the first time, she didn't just feel like she was flying, she felt like she was home. Spring returned to New York with quiet grace. The city shook off its winter chill. Trees lined the streets with soft blossoms, and the world seemed lighter somehow. For Leila Carter, that season felt different. The Grace Project had officially expanded to more than 50 countries. Airlines, schools, and hospitals had adapted it into their training systems. It was no longer a program, it was a philosophy. And yet, amid all the success, Leila found herself thinking often about beginnings, about that one moment at the gate that had changed everything. One morning, as she walked into the Ether Sky headquarters, sunlight poured through the tall glass windows, employees moved with purpose and laughter. She passed the wall-size display that now greeted everyone, "Fly with grace," because every seat holds a story. She stopped and smiled at it for a long moment. Those words had started as a line in her notebook, scribbled during a sleepless night. Now they glowed in the heart of the company. Inside Marcus's office, the atmosphere was calm, as always. Her father was sitting by the window, reading reports. "You're up early," he said, glancing up. "Couldn't sleep," she admitted, settling into the chair across from him. He studied her quietly. "Something on your mind?" Leila hesitated. "Dad, I keep thinking about the girl I used to be, the one standing at that gate. Sometimes I wonder if that hadn't happened, would any of this exist?" Marcus closed the folder slowly. "Maybe not," he said, "but you can't live life measuring blessings against pain. They're part of the same flight path. You can't have one without the other." She smiled faintly. "That sounds like something Mom would say." He chuckled softly. "That's because she said it first." They shared a quiet laugh, then fell into silence, both staring out at the skyline where planes traced thin white lines across the morning sky. A week later, Leila flew to Atlanta for an event celebrating the Grace Project for youth. Schools had adopted the program as part of their curriculum. Students were learning to manage emotions, listen with empathy, and resolve conflict with compassion. When she arrived, the auditorium was filled with children holding handmade signs. "Kindness is power. Grace is cool. We see you, Miss Carter." Leila felt tears sting her eyes. The principal, a warm woman named Mrs. Green, welcomed her onto the stage. "These kids talk about you every day," she said. "You've given them something they didn't know they could be proud of their kindness." During her talk, Leila kept it simple. "When I was your age," she said, "I thought the world would only respect me if I was perfect. But I learned that strength isn't about never breaking. It's about how gently you put yourself back together." The children listened wide-eyed. Some parents in the audience wiped their tears quietly. Afterward, a small boy approached her with a nervous smile. "Miss Carter," he said, "I used to get in trouble for helping other kids, but now my teacher says I'm a leader." Leila knelt down and smiled. "You've always been a leader. You just needed someone to tell you." He grinned, and in that moment, she realized the story had already outgrown her. It belonged to everyone who believed in better. That evening, as she boarded her flight back home, the captain greeted her personally. "Miss Carter, it's an honor," he said. "I started flying because of your story." She thanked him, feeling a quiet swell of emotion. As the plane lifted through the clouds, she leaned back in her seat and closed her eyes. Somewhere deep inside, she felt peace, the kind that doesn't come from achievement, but from alignment, from knowing your life is where it's supposed to be. A few months later, Ether Sky hosted a special event at JFK, a memorial unveiling to honor those who had shaped the company's heart. The event would dedicate the new terminal's main concourse to the Grace Legacy Hall. Leila didn't know much about the ceremony, only that her father had insisted she attend. When she arrived, the space was breathtaking. The ceiling shimmered like silver waves, and the walls were etched with quotes about compassion, humanity, and resilience. At the center of the hall stood a large bronze sculpture, a paper airplane repaired with golden seams, inspired by her framed ticket. Beneath it, an inscription read, "Strength through Grace," in honor of Dana Carter. Leila froze. Her breath caught in her throat, her mother's name. Marcus stepped beside her, his voice barely above a whisper. She was the first to believe the sky could heal people. You made her dream come true. Tears welled in her eyes. You did this for her, and for you. Reporters took photos, but Leila didn't notice. She walked closer, tracing her fingers over the engraved letters. A small plaque beside it quoted her mother's letter, "The sky isn't just where we fly, it's where we learn to rise." In that moment, Leila felt time fold in on itself, past and present merging. She could almost hear her mother's laughter, the rustle of paper tickets, the hum of jet engines in the distance. Later that evening, as the crowd thinned, Leila stood alone under the sculpture's soft lights. Nancy Shaw approached quietly, now silver-haired but radiant as ever. "You know," Nancy said, "I used to hate airports. They reminded me of all my mistakes. But now, every time I walk through here, I feel peace, like this place forgave me too." Leila turned, smiling gently. "You forgave yourself. Nancy, that's what matters." Nancy nodded, eyes glistening. "Thank you for letting me be part of the redemption. You earned it," Leila said softly. They hugged, long and wordless, surrounded by the hum of passing travelers' lives intersecting briefly in the place where a story had begun. That night, Leila drove with Marcus to Brooklyn, to the small park where her mother used to take her as a child. They sat on a bench beneath the same oak tree, older now but still standing strong. "You know what's funny," Marcus said after a while. "All these years, we've been running an airline, but the most important flight was the one that happened in people's hearts." Leila smiled, resting her head against his shoulder. "That's the one that never lands." The wind rustled through the branches above, carrying faint echoes of laughter, of voices, of time itself. Somewhere far above, a plane passed overhead, its lights blinking softly against the twilight. Leila watched it disappear into the horizon, her chest full, her spirit calm. The torn ticket, the humiliation, The redemption, the grace, all of it had brought her here. Full circle. She whispered into the night, "Mom, the sky belongs to everyone now." Marcus reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "And it always will." They sat there for a long time, not speaking, just listening to the distant hum of the city, to life moving forward, to the quiet music of everything coming home. The story of Leila Carter isn't just about a torn ticket or a powerful father. It's about something deeper, the courage to stay kind when the world isn't. Her grace turned humiliation into healing, and her compassion transformed anger into awareness. In our own lives, we all face moments when we're misunderstood, judged, or disrespected. And in those moments, we hold a quiet power, the power to respond, not react, to choose empathy over ego, to remember that dignity is not given by others, it's built within us, for older generations especially. This story reminds us that every act of patience, every word of understanding, shapes the next one. We pass on not our titles, but our values. Just like Leila's father passed his to her, and she carried it to the world. So, tonight, before you sleep, ask yourself who might need your grace tomorrow. Sometimes, the smallest kindness becomes the loudest legacy. Thank you for watching, for feeling, for believing in stories that heal. If Leila's journey touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel, because every time you do, you help one more story of hope take flight.